is Bloomberg Technology. Happy New Year. Coming up in the next hour, a bumpy start to the year at Tesla. The company reveals Model 3 deliveries fell short of expectations in the fourth quarter. Plus, as the government shutdown continues, the FCC and FTC could be impacted. What that means for big tech in the new year. And Netflix makes a controversial decision to cave to the demands of Saudi Arabia as it hires a new CFO and prepares for a big drop of new shows this January. First, to our top story, Elon Musk is starting off the new year on a familiar note, one of uncertainty. Tesla shares plunged on the first day of 2019 after the company unexpectedly announced it's cutting prices on all of its electric cars in the U.S. by $2,000. This after delivering fewer Model 3 sedans than expected in the fourth quarter. The price reduction also will partially make up for the U.S. tax credit that's been cut in half. Here to discuss, we have Loop Ventures co-founder Gene Munster and Bloomberg's Dana Hull. So Dana, walk us through the numbers.
So deliveries were not a huge miss, but it was less than the street had expected. But I think the big thing that caught everyone by surprise is that the price cut. I mean, if there's off-the-hook demand for this car, why are they cutting prices? And what is the reservation number? That wasn't in the release, and that's an issue for people too.
Gene, what's your read?
Very similar to Dana's. I think that the production number was a disappointment. I think when you're in a growth phase, even with their production issues, investors want to see you exceeding those numbers. So it was called a 1% miss, but that's a little bit emphasized when you're in a growth phase. And separately, yeah, that price cut does beg the question about what's going on. I would add one small detail to that, is that the $2,000, we're going from $7,500 tax credit to $3,750 as of today. That is clearly going to have some impact on demand. The $2,000 represents, on average, call it a 3% subsidy that Tesla's giving. In other words, Emily, I think if there was something structurally wrong with the demand, that you need more than a 3% subsidy to continue the story. So said a slightly different way, I think that the outlook and the opportunity for Tesla is still bright.
And yeah, in your note, you call it a psychological setback, which doesn't sound good.
Yeah, it's not good, especially when you think about some of these debt payments coming up and the importance of having the stock move to that $360 level. They can service this, call it $970 million debt payment in March without the need to convert stock, but it would certainly be easier if they did. So the psychological piece is simply this, is investors have been teething with how to think about the Tesla story over the next 1 year more aggressively. They've been debating that. I think the 5-year picture is much clearer and much more optimistic, but that's the issue here at hand, is the psychological setback of a slight production miss on top of a price cut. What do you make of that?
So, Dana, let's talk about the milestones for this year. What are the other numbers and milestones that you are going to be waiting for?
Well, 2019 is a pivotal year. I mean, it seems like every year is a pivotal year for Tesla, but we're going to find out if they had a profitable quarter with ZEV credits or not. They're going to build this factory in Shanghai. It sounds like Elon Musk was tweeting over the break that he's going to be going to Shanghai sometime soon. There's a big question about Model 3 demand in Europe. They're going to begin deliveries in Europe in February, and so everyone's sort of waiting to see what demand for Model 3 really is like there. And then they've got this whole product pipeline of the Model Y, the semi-truck, the pickup truck. Where are they going to build those cars?
Gene, what does the competition picture look like for Tesla this year? I mean, you have Audi, Porsche, other companies that are ready to go with new models.
So at first take, you would say that it's going to be much more competitive in 2019, and I think that that's the incorrect conclusion here. The answer is that some of those companies, there's about 5 major companies have announced first-time EVs that will be available in 2019. But the reality is they're not going to ship many of those. I mean, we're talking at, call it 90,000 deliveries for Tesla in the December quarter. I bet collectively those 5 new entrants won't ship 90,000 vehicles for the entire year. In other words, is that it's headline risk. And I think what you're going to see here is what really the fate of Tesla over the next year is probably going to be more dependent upon just the overall growth in EVs. They're going to ride that curve very nicely. Assuming that the market is good and people are buying cars, that should be positive. I don't think that the competition piece is going to upset their market share.
So talking about the 5-year plan, I just finished a road trip through California, and I was just impressed by how many Tesla charging stations I saw. You think over the next 15 years that almost 100% of vehicles will be electric cars? What does that mean for Tesla?
Massive opportunity. I mean, you think globally, call it 85, 90 million vehicles sold a year. We're talking about doing sub 1 million per year today. They have 50% market share in the U.S. I would just say, I'm not going to go through all the details, the technical details, the difference between electric and a gas engine, but cars shouldn't be gas. It's pretty straightforward for a lot of reasons. And so I think that Tesla's opportunity more specifically within that, despite more competition, is their ability to produce these cars at a more profitable pace than traditional OEMs. That's going to be the piece that's going to separate this Tesla story as this EV opportunity emerges, is the ability to produce a $35,000, $40,000 mainstream vehicle that's profitable.
Dana, what is the cash position of the company going into this year?
They have cash on hand. They need more of it. They need to pay this debt off, and they're going to need to raise capital at some point to build all of these other products. But they've been very clear that they do not want to raise capital, and there was nothing about capital needs in the release today.
So, Gene, what does that mean?
I think that if they don't get to that 360 mark, they may get to that 360 mark stock price by March. If they don't get there, we'll have an update, as Dana said, with the cash position on the December quarter when they report that. But I think that they'll be able to service that through their existing cash balance. And so I don't think that there is a risk. That's a critical point here, is that the last year has been, Dana's done incredible reporting on this too. It's been a really pivotal year, 2018, especially around the cash position. I don't think that is at risk over the next 6 months. Investor psychology is at risk, but I don't think the long-term health of the company is at risk.
So, Dana, we talked about the 1-year milestones. What are the 5-year milestones that you'll be reporting on?
5 years out?
Over the next 5 years.
Well, I still think a big part of the Tesla story is that they're not just a car company. They really have ambitions to be an energy company. They are selling their batteries to utilities, not just in California, but abroad. And there is a huge market for batteries to help store wind and solar on the grid. And I mean, that's just a part of the Tesla story that no one pays attention to because it's not as sexy as the cars, but it's a big market opportunity for them.
All right, Dana Hull, I know you will keep us informed throughout the year. Gene Munster, as always, you will continue to update us with your analysis. Well, a lawsuit could delay mobile phone upgrades in Germany. Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, and Vodafone are suing the German government over a planned auction of wireless frequencies for high-speed 5G networks. They say the rules governing the sale are so onerous, they outweigh the value of the spectrum being sold. The German government has yet to comment. Coming up, the ongoing U.S. government shutdown could have a big impact on big tech. Will the FCC's agenda be derailed as the agency prepares to shutter operations? And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Washington has been in a stalemate since December 22nd, when the federal government partially shut down. While Congress and the president try to work out a deal, we're seeing the impact within several agencies. Some 800,000 federal employees have either been furloughed or will continue to work without pay. And now the Federal Communications Commission will suspend most operations Thursday if the shutdown continues, potentially impacting its agenda for the coming year. Gigi Sohn is a fellow at the Georgetown Law Institute for Tech Law and Policy, as well as a former counselor at the FCC, and joins us now from Washington. So, Gigi, what does a shutdown at the FCC actually look like?
Well, the FCC is going to give more details later today, but it really depends on how long the shutdown lasts. The shutdown lasts only a couple of days. If there are filings due of some sort, those filing times will be delayed past the shutdown. But if the shutdown lasts a couple of weeks, that could have a huge impact on mergers like the Sprint T-Mobile merger or the proposed merger of Tribune and Nexstar. Filings get delayed. People cannot work. so they can't work on the transaction. They can't have meetings with stakeholders. So it could have an impact, certainly, on major proceedings and major mergers if indeed the shutdown lasts more than just a few days.
So are we talking about a delay here, when it comes to these big potential mergers, or, could it actually change the result?
I don't think it would change the result necessarily. I think delay is the more likely scenario. Let me explain how the FCC looks at mergers. They have it's an involuntary clock, an 180-day clock that they give themselves to look at mergers and decide whether they ought to be given the green light or there should be conditions or what have you. We're, I guess, about 100 days or so into the Sprint T-Mobile clock. And whenever there's a stoppage of any kind, whether it be a government shutdown or the FCC needs more information, they toll that clock, they stop that clock. Certainly a government shutdown will toll the clock again. So it just gives the agency more time, even though it's not a mandatory 180 days, but it's a kind of it's a goal that they set for themselves. So certainly, if you cannot work, if you cannot have meetings with stakeholders, if you cannot have internal meetings, if you cannot have meetings with the Department of Justice, that's going to slow down the FCC's consideration of this and other mergers.
As we understand it, the spectrum auctions will continue, but more broadly, can an agency's agenda be derailed during a shutdown?
Well, it has to be derailed because they can't work. Other than, the FCC put out a statement on Monday saying, if there are issues that, affect life and property, for example, there was a recent 911 outage with CenturyLink across the country, CenturyLink being a major internet service provider, and the FCC launched an investigation. I would expect that investigation would probably continue during the shutdown. But if it doesn't affect life and property, if it doesn't affect spectrum auctions, which are funded separately, the auctions basically fund the work of the FCC on auctions, I don't expect that work to continue. And yes, if the shutdown lasts a long time, it absolutely can derail an agency's agenda.
And what about, the agenda for big tech more broadly? I mean, we're looking at the FTC as well, which, has a massive ongoing investigation into Facebook, which could also be slowed down.
Absolutely. If you're a big Silicon Valley company right now, you're probably cheering the government shutdown because, when we left Congress and the government in late December, Facebook, Google, other big tech companies were in the crosshairs, particularly Facebook. And as we know, the FTC was doing an investigation on the Cambridge Analytica scandal in Facebook and other data and privacy issues around that company. So the FTC shut down its operations, I believe it was on Thursday, so that work is stopping as well. So if you're Facebook right now, you're pretty happy with the fact that the government is not proceeding with its work.
Now, similarly, are we also looking at a delay, or could this lead to a different outcome?
I really don't think it would affect the outcome much at all. It's just a delay. I mean, again, nobody can come in and convince anybody at the FTC to look at this differently because they can't meet with them. They can't work. So I don't know what would change.